So, cranial nerve number 9, that's one we want to know. The glossopharyngeal nerve. What's its purpose? It's salivation when you're in the parasympathetic nervous system. So when you're in the sympathetic nervous system, what happens is it shuts off. And the lips go tight and the mouth goes dry. And you see all these facial nerves just line up. They look like a guitar string right in the horse's face. So that's under the impression of the sympathetic nervous system. And they can fool you. They can look pretty calm. But you'll still see those tendons in that horse's face. And I have the scientific research to prove it. I've been bucked off a number of times where I've got on thinking, oh, this is not too bad. You know, the horse seems calm, and I see some other signs. But licking and chewing is a big one, because that means that cranial nerve number 9 is getting reactivated, and the salivary system is getting reestablished. You could not get your finger in this. That's what Tom Dorrance used to do. Actually, with horses like this, he'd take his thumb and try to get into its mouth and reactivate that salivary gland. And if we think of rest and digest, horses can't really eat. I mean, you can put grain under them when they're in the sympathetic nervous system. They're not going to touch that. So it's interesting. I was talking to Martin about that, and I said, you know what? If we get off a trailer and we're somewhere new, and you let your horse graze, they're not just grazing. They're designed with that long nose to be able to eat, but they've got these funnels, these radar, that work independently. So watch their ears when you put them somewhere new and you let them graze. They're constantly sensing information. Look at their eye, their pupil. It's horizontal. It's meant to look at the whole horizon and see what's out there. And if you let your horse graze in a new place and then saddle up your horse and ride it, do your own research. Watch how much calmer your horse is in that new situation than if you just say, okay, let's go. And you hop on the saddle and off you go. They're spooking at everything that's new to them. And in fact, when I was talking to Martin about it, I said, you need to experiment with this. He goes, but when no other cowboys are around, because they're not allowed to eat while they're working. And so we laughed about that. And this doesn't mean, don't go home and say, well, Dr. Peter said just let my horse run out on a ride and munch on things. They know the difference. When you let them graze, then you get on them, and we have work to do. They know the difference if you show them that. But Martin said, Tom Dorrance did the same thing with me. I was trying to get this horse on the trailer, and it was all jazzed up, and we were in a bit of a hurry. And he said, Martin, let him eat that grass over there. What do you mean let him eat the grass? Just let him eat the grass. And so the horse went over there and munched for a while, and they said, okay, now put him on. And sure enough, that horse was in the right neurochemical state to hear that message, and then to get on. So it's a pretty cool thing to do, to be able to help your horse regulate. And that's one of our problems, is that we get horses in a state and we leave them a victim of their neurochemical state, right, without allowing them to come back down to where they're comfortable. And if you take away nothing else today, you'll learn, in learning for a horse, they are asking one question again and again and again. Am I safe? Am I going to be safe? If you answer that question adequately, you just move right along. Right? But if you don't, then their radar, their reticular activating system, interprets things as possibly harmful and a threat. And anything that a horse can't explain is considered a predatory threat unless proven otherwise. Oh, that's just a plastic bag. That's a slicker hanging on the fence. Everything is a predatory threat unless proven otherwise. So we have to allow our horses to do something called down-regulating. They have to be able to drop back down and be calm enough to hear our message. And we get after our horses, but we're the same way in certain ways. we have a big frontal lobe, but if we get in a panic situation, we're not necessarily using, reasoning everything through intelligently. We're panicked, we're fearful, we're knee-jerk reactions. Sometimes we freeze, we even become paralyzed. And we have a big brain that could think through all the options. They don't have those options. The only way they know to be calm, to get back to calmness, is fight or flight, unless we've shown them a path. And then you can get to a point where your horse loses sight of self-preservation. They'll run into a fence, they'll run off a cliff. You can get them that juiced out. That's just a little fight. I wanted to put that in there, fight or flight, so you kind of see that expression. Where we can compare our brain with a horse's brain is these green areas. So we have their big cerebellum. Look at our little cerebellum. This is human brain. Compared to the one I showed you, the horse's brain cerebellum makes up almost a third. Right? So there's our cerebellum, an area called the basal ganglia and the supplementary motor area, or the motor area. So when you learn to drive a car, you're using this system. The front of your brain is involved for a while. When you first start, you're looking in the mirror, the radio's off, oh, I gotta make sure, and what's my speed limit? But after a while, the basal ganglia says, you know what, we got this. Think about other things. Think about your girlfriend or boyfriend. Think about, what you want to eat for dinner. So we drive to work wherever, and we don't even know how we got there. It's mostly on automatic pilot. Well, that's what the horse is trying to do, put these motor patterns into the automatic pilot so that when we dial up something, they're not jumping way up there in the nervous system, right? They're just reaching back in the cerebellum and say, let's play this record. This is Yogi Berra. He's a baseball player. And he had a home run one time and he came back to the bench and all the players said, Yogi, did that pitcher throw you a fastball or a curveball? And he said, well, I can't hit and think at the same time. And he was right. What he had done is actually hit 100,000 curveballs, and he'd hit 100,000 fastballs. And so there was no real mental processing to that. It was all in his basal ganglia. He reacted to the pitch. He did exactly what his body was supposed to do, but not without a lot of thinking. So those are the kinds of patterns that horses develop. These are human brains. Same with the horse, though. This is what's called functional MRI. Functional MRI is a device that can take a picture of your brain in real time. So if you're reading a book, I can look at a scan and I can tell which areas of your brain you're using to read that book in real time. It's pretty amazing. So I was asked by Cisco Systems in California to come out and help them figure out how to put together learning programs that everybody could adapt to. But what I had to show them is that, so here's the instructor. And you can see which areas of the brain the instructor lights up. All these people in the front row have pretty similar scans. This one never got their coffee or ended up in the wrong classroom. But they're not machines. Our brains are individual to who we are. You've been making your brain all throughout your lifetime. All your experiences are wrapped up in creating your brain. Same with your horse. They work certain ways, but all those experiences have built a scaffolding for your horse and for us as well. So if you have a scaffolding, if you have things in place, so learning and memory fundamentally are associative. That means that, if you can associate something to prior knowledge, then you have a rung to hang that information onto. Brains don't like having things in isolation. So if you don't have some sort of knowledge to hang that to, your brain will just jettison it and let go. So what we want to do is build a scaffolding. And we'll talk about how to do that. But the more we can do that, the more learning that can occur. And novices, they have a very rudimentary scaffolding, so there's things that get said to them that they can't assimilate. So what we're doing now is we're just sort of starting some groundwork. Many of you have read things and seen things, so a lot of these pieces are starting to fit together. This is a wash, and that's okay, because you're starting to build something that you'll hear more of, and you'll want to read more of, and you'll hear Mark talk about, etc. And pretty soon, you'll find that you're developing this whole network. And this truly happens. These are dendrites in the brain. That's the scaffolding. That's the scaffolding in your brain. Horses have the same thing. So what we want to do, this is really empowering. We want to create this tremendous network of connections. If you just go point A to point B, you can get to point A to point B pretty quickly. Right? So you can kind of force an animal or a human to just do that over and over and over, and you make a super highway for that only. But what my friend Martin Black tells me is, I want to make special forces horses. They'll have so many dendrites that they'll be faced with situations they even haven't faced before, but they have the confidence that somewhere there's an option, and they're not going way, way up here in the nervous system and freaking out. They're actually trying to problem solve. Because what I've done is set up situations where, in the right neurochemical state, I've asked them questions. I haven't just gotten after them. I've let them figure things out. And what we found, even with humans, it's that process of figuring something out that creates the dendrites. So even if you're wrong, it's that search that creates dendrites. So setting up problems for our horse to solve, or letting them make a decision, what we can call right or wrong, right, creates more dendrites than punishment and go back and we're going to do this again, and we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again, and we're going to do it again. It may work well if you got a horse in the circus that only has to go do this one thing, but what happens when you take your horse out on the trail? This is an excellent place for our first break, because we're going to the drugstore in your horse's head after this. All right, here we are, back at the drugstore. But this drugstore is in your brain, and it's in your horse's brain as well. We have tons of chemicals in our brains. One of those that we're going to learn about, and you've heard about, I'm sure, is dopamine. Big dopamine fans here. Dopamine is a neurochemical that's related to reward and movement. If you're addicted to cocaine, you're not addicted to cocaine. You're addicted to the dopamine that gets released from the cocaine working on the pleasure center in your brain. It's really the dopamine hit that you get. It is so reinforcing. But to get dopamine, you have to move. You have to search out dopamine. And that's why searching out answers and setting up problems creates so many dendrites. And that's why, for our horse, to solve problems is really beneficial if we want to grow brain connections. Let me illustrate. This red area here is high dopamine, and the blue is low dopamine. So, you get the highest hits if you explore and expend energy. Now, dopamine is so reinforcing, it can actually override fear. So what we want to do is create curiosity in our horse, because when they become curious, they start to explore and they start to expend energy. And you really want to facilitate that. That helps them to down-regulate their brain using that curiosity. And they get a big dopamine hit for doing that as well. This just shows you lots of studies, so there's really no studies in motivated behavior or learning that doesn't involve dopamine. Our brains are made for it. We have dopamine receptors. So here is dopamine, the neurotransmitter, and it fits into the receptor, bingo, and it fires. Same with opiates. We have opiate receptors. So people, and I talked to Jim about this last night, people say, oh, I want my horse to have endorphins. Some person once told me, I want to endorphinize my horse's brain. Well, there's no scientific word, endorphinize. Endorphins are not necessarily a good drug. Endorphins we create by stress. You have to create pain to get endorphins. What is an endorphin? Endogenous morphine. That's what it stands for, endogenous morphine. A morphine-like substance that you make in your brain. How do you get it? By creating pain. That's the runner's high. You go out and you just punish yourself running, but you feel really good in your brain after a while. It's because you've created endorphins. Yeah, the endorphins make you feel better. The opioids make you feel better, but you have to create stress or pain to get there. They're designed to allow you to continue to fight or mate or do whatever, even if you're hurt. This area here, the nucleus accumbens, this is a horse's brain, is a pleasure center in the brain. And the amygdala is right here, and the amygdala is related to fear and aggression. Fear, largely in our substantia nigra, I talked about that, is a big store of dopamine. So there's like a toggle switch right here. There's not like a toggle switch in your horse's brain, but I mean the analogy. You could ask me when we do the dissection, but it's not there. But what happens is we get the horse curious, and they start to move towards that dopamine hit, and they solve something, and they get their reward. That's reinforcing. But they go a little farther, and I don't know about this situation, and self-preservation starts to kick in, and then the amygdala is saying, you know, you're out of here, and if you push too hard, you'll know. Your horse is out of there. I don't want any part of this. So it's that art of toggling back and forth between that curiosity and, oh, I'm a little scared, so I'm going to lay off, and we'll try again. And the more you do that, actually the higher that ceiling lifts in their nervous system, so that it's harder to get in to the sympathetic nervous system and get a reaction because they're so driven by that curiosity. When do you know you've gone too far? Well, self-preservation kicks in and they back off. That you just let them go back to homeostasis and start again. You don't say, oh, you missed it, doggone it. You will do it 100 times or get after them, because now you're going way up here and there's no learning that's taking place when they're way up here. And there's an art to that. Actually, you get a feel for that after a while, just that playing back and forth and using that curiosity. I started my first Mustang not too long ago, and I went really just let him talk to me on using curiosity. And it's amazing. He was so much easier for me than a few decades ago when I started a domestic horse. And I don't know how many times I got bucked off and all kinds of other things because, well, we should be moving to step B and now we need to move to step C. And I understood that something was going on with the brain, but not to the degree I do now. So you can get there without a whole lot of dust and without a whole lot of trimming back dendrites, actually creating dendrites, if you can help your horse get in that emotionally regulated state. What does that? Here's another one. More and more research is coming out recently on serotonin, and this is a big one. Dopamine will give us our reward, but serotonin is linked to emotional balance. If you have depression, you may have be resistant to serotonin in your brain or not have enough. So all the antidepressants that we make, SSRIs like Prozac, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They keep serotonin in your system longer. It plays a role in the horse as well. Why would we want to know about this neurotransmitter with our horse? Related to mood, fears, anxiety, feelings of relaxation, mental focus, learning ability, clarity of thought. That's all pretty important stuff. How would you like to have that in your toolbox when you go to work with your horse? Same thing. Serotonin receptors. They fit in there and they will keep emotional balance. Here's one study, and I'll read it and then I'll explain it in English. The effect of serotonergic stimulation on learning rates for rewards apparent after long inter-trial intervals. So here's what they did, is they taught animals a series of different tasks. They found that if they left long trials, long gaps between each trial, so you learned something and you waited, and you learned something and you waited, and you learned something and you waited, that those animals could go back to those things and show that they learned them. But if you piled them too closely together without that waiting time, when under pressure, the animals always went back to their self-preservation response. They always went back to the initial response. It's like they forgot the whole series of trials that we taught. So we do know this about learning is that, and this is just one simple study just to illustrate the example, is that no rest periods. If you worked for 60 minutes, scores would end up to be 45. But if you did 1 minute work, 1 minute rest, 1 minute work, 1 minute rest, you'd be assimilating that information better and your score would be higher. So we know space and time is vital for learning. So we put somebody in a functional MRI and we have them do a task. And then we say, okay, just wait there for a while, and we expect not to see a whole lot of brain activity when the person is just sitting in the MRI machine. But what we find is that not too much longer, seconds afterwards, the same areas light up in the brain that lit up when they were learning the task. So they're replaying that task over again. And that's what your horse does as well. It replays what it learns. But the important part is we couldn't provide any outside stimuli, because outside stimuli would interrupt that replay. So you've got to give them a break without any interruption. And then something even more interesting happened. Not only, if we waited long enough, did they replay what happened, but new areas of the brain started to light up. So what was happening is they were forming associations with other things. They're building a scaffolding, in essence. So we know that you need relaxation, because when you have this relaxation, that's when your brain can assimilate all the information. That's when you can hook your ideas together. That's where you're forming connections. We need that break. So where we think that's happening, right? We used to say, well, that probably means they're learning, they're licking and chewing. So this horse has gone up into the sympathetic nervous system, and now they drop back down into parasympathetic, and you start to see this licking and chewing. Well, they probably got their dopamine hit well before this. This appears to be the time that serotonin's involved. So what they're doing is replaying, and you watch your horse, leave them alone for a little while after you've shown them something. And they'll kind of do this drop-off thing, and then they'll bounce their head back up again, and they'll keep licking and chewing. And that licking and chewing piece is vital. You know that they're in the parasympathetic nervous system because the glossopharyngeal nerve, old number 9, will start to help them salivate, but leave them. That's their reflection time. That's when they're building dendrites. And my friend Martin says, I don't even let people go up and touch their horse afterwards. I say, no, you just leave that horse alone. We want to say, good boy, and we slap, right? So how disruptive is that to this whole pattern of replay? And here's the cool thing. Let's say we get this side pass for the first time. Wow, let's do it again. Let's do it again. That's really good. Let's get it even better, right? Your horse has no chance to assimilate that. And you cannot do it better than they can replay it. They know what moves all those muscles, right? So you're actually interrupting that opportunity for them to do it even better and lock it in. Reflection. What happens when the brain reflects? It can take a skill or process, right? And it prompts the brain, it stimulates that same connection and strengthens them. So it's strengthening its learning. When it goes back and rethinks something back through, it's re-strengthening that bond. You're interrupting that. When did that happen for you? I'll tell you. You learned to ride a bike for the first time. And you went out there and, your dad took the training wheels off and you fell down and you scraped your knee and you turned the handlebars sideways because you crashed. And I'll never learn to ride this thing. Or go ahead and sell it. Right? And if you kept riding, you got diminishing returns. That night, if you just kept working at it, you just got worse and worse. And you got in your own way. Right? You went to bed, you woke up the next morning and said, well, maybe I'll try it one more time. And you went out there and somehow magically, overnight, wow, I think I'm getting the hang of it. That's because your brain replayed that without interference over again through the night. And that's why a lot of top athletes, skiers down certain paths, will rethink and visualize that whole course and do it better than if they went and ran it 20 times. Let your horse have time and space to build their scaffolding. Hebb's rule, neurons that fire together wire together. So if we're giving them that, what we call dwell time, right? Those neurons are firing and they're creating a pathway. So this may be learning. Here's dendrites. So we're getting some growth with dopamine alone. We've done something with them. They've gotten their reward. They've gotten their release. I want to bring up that point too, release and relief. Because we mix those up, right? We think, well, we took our leg off. That's relief. That's release. The horse is going to tell us when they got the relief. The horse knows. You don't know. Right? You'll know from having a conversation with your horse. But it appears that with an inter-trial waiting period between trials, serotonin, under emotional balance, that's what serotonin is all about, will create this. So you need safety. The horse needs to feel safe. All of us do. We need certain things for learning. One is we need to feel safe. Kids in inner city schools don't feel safe. Right? So it makes it hard to learn. So your horse has to feel safe. They're going to ask you that question in a number of ways, and you have to answer that. Yes, you're going to be safe. You need their attention. They can't be looking off over the fence. They can't have their head down eating grass. If you're going to have a learning situation, you need their attention. And you have to create problem-solving situations so that they're motivated. That's how they get their dopamine hit. So if we can do those things, we're going to go really far with our horse. You'll be amazed at how smart your horse suddenly gets if they feel safe, if we are able to capture their attention, and we can motivate them to do tasks by searching out answers. Here's Martin, and I have a quote from him. He says, especially with a horse who has been somewhat stressed, had to work quickly and was at times a bit unsure, but came through with a positive outcome, that's when I'd wait for 10 minutes rather than 2. I'd rather sit there and twiddle my thumbs and give the horse a chance to rethink the experience they just had. That's exactly what he's talking about. In fact, he had to train himself not to want to do. So what he'd do is he'd start 4 colts at the same time in a round pen. And it forced him to spend 15 minutes with this one, and then 15 minutes with that one. And they were calmer, because they had confederates in there with them. They had other horses, right? And so he'd move on to each one, and he said, it's amazing. But that 15 minutes, and then leaving the horse for 45 minutes to replay that, and I get farther than I would if I had one horse in there for the full hour. So this idea that we need to drill on top of that, they check out on us. And actually, we're overwhelming them. Instead of these brief chunks, we're just overwhelming them with a wave of information and expecting them to hold it when they only have a sliver of frontal lobe. They're sensory motor. Let them sense what we're asking, let them answer motorically, and let's use their system. But if we're expecting them to this dumb horse, he knows better than that. He knows how to do this. He's just acting up today. There's reasons your horse does what it does. It doesn't because they're a horse and they have a horse brain. It's all this stuff we add on, this baggage and labeling that really creates horse problems because we get them way up there. What gets them up there? Confusion. I don't understand what's being asked of me. Right? And you ask the same question again and again. Sometimes you have to be creative and say, you know what, I've asked that question 50 times, and that horse doesn't understand what I'm saying. Well, maybe you're speaking French and they speak English, so you have to be creative and ask in a different way, because every horse is different. And that's why a system of A, B, C, D doesn't always work. You have to know what you're dealing with, and a good teacher would. We want to create, as much as we can, an internal locus of control. External locus of control creates a lot of stress. Here's what this is all about. If I feel like I have no decision-making potential, that the world is forcing me to make all my decisions, I'm being told what to do all the time, then the world, my locus of control, my ability to control the world, is determined by the outside world. If the outside world's threatening, then that's highly stressful. But if I have an internal locus of control, then what I do matters. Right? What I do, I can direct outcomes. This is learned helplessness. These are experiments done like in the 50s and 60s. You can't do them anymore because they're not ethical. And here's another myth we're going to get rid of. Learned helplessness is not a good thing. And I'll tell you why. Okay, so here's a dog. And this is an electric grid down here. And we have side A and side B. You can't see it here, but there'd be a light bulb above A and a light bulb above B. So the light bulb would come on above A, and seconds later, electricity would run through this grate, and the dog would jump to B. And then a light would come on in B, and electricity would run through B, and the dog, to get away from the shock, would jump to A. It didn't take very long till the dog knew, that light bulb's on, I jump here. Light bulb's on, I jump here. And it figured it out. It had an internal locus of control. It's not the best situation, but when things get bad, I can get away from it. I know I can. I just jump to the other side. So then, here's what they did. They light up the light bulb, and they electrified the entire grid. So the dog and the horses will do the same thing under this pressure. They just revert back to what they did. So that dog jumped like crazy, back and forth, back and forth. It worked before, it's got to work again. But it didn't. So eventually, the dog would just back into the corner, begin to shake, accept the shock, start to urinate on itself, and actually we found that it really trims back dendrites, and that animal became almost unusable. It was a trauma. So I've heard people say things like, I'd like to have my horse have learned helplessness so that, they just stand still and they don't cause a big fuss, etc. What we've done is, that is abusive. You don't want that in your horse to be so worn down like that old, dude ranch horse that's not even going to move, that's afraid to move if a tree falls on it, right? Because there's no escape. So what we're doing in learned helplessness is preventing a situation where there's no escape. You get dopamine, you get learning when you have an internal locus of control and you can get your reward.